Good morning, RadioNext.TV, taking you way back in the house right here. Dr. Mark Echo, Harold H.B. Bell, and we are on Warp and Woof Radio, as we always do, each and every Wednesday morning, 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I have a great guest in studio with us today. Dr. Clyde Posley is in the house, the great shepherd of Antioch Missionary Baptist Church. Dr. Mark, how are you today, my brother?
Doing really, really well. Just introducing folks out here to this great facility, Collaborate 317. Really happy to be here in the house with you and all the great setup here for the folks. Looking forward to what we can do here.
Absolutely, and we're not going to waste time this morning going to our normal musical break. Dr. Clyde is taking care of some business, as you know, pastors have to do impromptu work. So we're going to go right in. Introduce the guest, Dr. Mark.
Yeah, so we have Dr. Clyde Posley here today. Doctor, thanks so much for spending some time here with us today.
I am delighted to be here. Hello, HB. Hello, Dr. Mark. I'm excited to be here today and to be invited to talk about such a prescient topic, such a relevant now topic.
Absolutely.
I'm just humbled to be here, and thanks for the invitation.
Absolutely. So just for the folks listening to us today, we got a whole bunch of folks from actually around the country listening to this episode today. Tell us a little bit about your church. Tell us about your family. Tell us about what you do in Indianapolis.
Okay, I'm the pastor of the Antioch Baptist Church, located at 704 East 32nd Street, here in the heart of Indy, at another way of saying 32nd and College, or 32nd and Fall Creek, right near 30th Street. I've been there for 18 years.
Wow!
I know I don't sound old enough to but I've been there for 18, going on 19 years. The church is 130 years old, Dr. Eccles, and I'm humbled and yet proud to be their pastor. I've got some great people there, people that have supported my family. I'm married. I have 4 children. Actually, my oldest son is my minister of music. He's doing a great job there.
Great.
And I have 2 boys, 2 girls. My second eldest son, the former football standout at Ball State. He's now working here in Indianapolis. I have another student oldest daughter's at Indiana State. And my youngest daughter's a pre-med student at IU down in Bloomington.
Wonderful.
So I've been there, working in the inner city with an emphasis on race relations and the importance of inclusion and crossing racial divides with the gospel. I've also done some extended work as an outpouring of my ministry there at Antioch with Pink Forever, a cancer servicing organization that ministers to the right now needs of cancer survivors. And then also, and the way I met you, I believe, was us working on a panel together about with the Red Alliance,
and
some of the disparaging numbers in the death rate across racial lines with breast cancer and healthcare awareness. But I've also worked extensively with men's ministry throughout the city, various churches, and that's been a major thrust of mine, as well as youth ministry, trying to strengthen families by helping the members of the family, individual members of the family, self-actualize, understand what their role is, how parents should parent biblically, how children should relate to their parents, but biblically, not based on what the world teaches. So I've had a great run. I've been blessed. People have been good to me at the church, and I like to feel like I've tried to be good to them.
That's great. Well, we're so thankful for your time today. This is just a huge effort that you make to come out and chat with us. And as we were talking off air, just for everybody's benefit, I mentioned Dr. Posley. This is not a one-and-done situation. Right. We're going to come back and do this again and again and again. We hope to work together in many different ways toward unity in Indianapolis, and so we're on our way. And this is a first great step. So let's talk first of all about the basis for Christian unity. Let's chat about that first.
Right. The I, as a pastor, but moreover as a Christian, in my mind, the basis for Christian unity is born out of the fact that we all belong to God. The truth
it is. Yep.
That we all belong to God. Ezekiel chapter 18 explains, God says through the prophet Ezekiel in the Old Testament that all souls are mine. They all belong to me. And then Jesus came along. Luke, the author of the book of Acts, comes along and explains to us in the 17th chapter of Acts that we are of one blood. God put us here together for the purpose of bringing to pass a one body fellowship of praise to Him. As you well know, Dr. Eccles, in John 3:16, God says God so loved the world, not any particular race. God does not speak in terms of race. He speaks in terms of His people. And so we have a mandate throughout Scripture from God to in all things be one, not just in the body of Christ, but we are one in creation. And we cannot let the otherness of people, as Martha Nussbaum would say, we cannot let the otherness of people predetermine our treatment of them. And we've got to do a better job. We've got to decide to be intentional about the unity, because of sin. It's not natural. People, we would like to, it's just, I don't understand why people don't get along. Well, the damage of sin is why we don't get along. Not because whites just don't like blacks or blacks just don't like whites. That's just not the case. There is a precursor.
That's right. That's right.
There is a precursor that has warped our concept of the value of unity. And ironically, God has set everything up, the ecosystem, etc., on the need for the other.
I just want to interject, because when you mentioned that, Clyde, it's like all of that is Scripture. I mean, throughout the Bible, it's Scripture about how we're supposed to come together as one, working as one. I mean, it goes into so many different analogies and breaking this down. And for some reason, with all this love we have for Christ, we never seem to get that when it comes to being and working as one. And that doesn't mean giving up your individualism.
Right.
It means how can it help better the body.
Exactly.
And if we could get that, man, we would be there. And it seems so simple, but we talk about this every day, every week, and it's like we just don't get it.
Interestingly enough, HB, what's ironic about it, and Dr. Eccles, is that how we treat each other is the leading, according to Scripture, indicator of that love of Christ.
There it is.
That's why this show is so important. That's why this is so valuable, what you're doing, Dr. Eccles, because the greatest, it's not in what we can accomplish or acquire. The greatest, according to John 13:35, Jesus says, and 34, he says, "A new commandment I give unto you, that you love one another." But then he goes on and singles out a passage of one verse that I think defines his requirements for unity. And by this, he says, "Shall all men know that you're my disciples if you have love one for the other." That literally says that Christ gives the world.
Right.
If you look at the transition, how he transitions, he says, all men know that you. So he's literally saying to the world, I'm giving the world the right to look at the church and decide if they know me, if you guys know me, if the coming disciples know me. The world has the right to look at us and say whether or not we know Christ based on how we treat each other.
It was interesting yesterday as we were having a discussion with someone downtown Indianapolis, and we were discussing funding for Comenius, and I said, I'm going to tell you my 15-second elevator speech for $1 million. If you give me $1 million, this is what I'm going to do with it. I am going to hire a younger African-American man to help him through his PhD program, and then let him take over my position as executive director of this organization in 5 to 7 years as he gets his feet under him and so on. And I fade to the background. My view of my reason for doing this is because the church doesn't look like me. The church looks like more than me, and that the church needs to be more inclusive, as we use that term, I think, in the best possible way of oneness and unity, as we're talking about today. Yes. When I tell you that little bit of a story, I'm emphasizing the point to everybody that what's most important to people is what they see us do.
Absolutely.
So if they know that Mark is already targeting in his succession plan for this approach, there will, even by that emphasis, be more of a unifying factor because somebody else is doing this and engendering this direction.
I like that.
So when we think about these kinds of things, the thing about doing things, what is the first thing that comes to your mind about doing things? What can we do? We're doing something on the radio show right now. You and I are developing a relationship with each other that's going to go beyond this show today. We're going to be talking about these things in the future. I mentioned this example, for instance. From your perspective, how do you see this?
Well, because of how things have escalated just over the years, historical history of America, we've got to start with forgiveness.
Yeah,
we have to start with. We cannot honestly do heart-to-heart ministry with animosity. We just cannot. We cannot, because we're doing it, we're saying that we do all things through Christ who strengthens us. That we're led by the power of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
Okay. In Mark chapter 11, when Christ, in the great passage where Christ says, "Say unto this mountain, be thou removed, cast in the midst of the sea," often we leave out as preachers that Jesus ends that stanza of Scripture saying, "And when you stand praying, when you do all of what I just said, forgive. If you do not forgive, neither will your heavenly Father forgive you." Now, he's not talking about the relationship. He's talking about, listen, you guys have a relationship, but you can't do this with a broken fellowship. And he's suggesting, Dr. Eccles, that if you can't forgive people, you're out of fellowship with me, which brings to mind, then how can we walk in the Spirit and be out of fellowship with him? So the first thing I would push is the need for us to forgive. But secondly, I would create more and more forums where we can have open dialogue, like this one, open dialogue about what the population sees as the problem to racial unity, yes, to cultural unity, to societal unity. Because I have learned, and the Bible teaches, we need to be slow to speak and quick to hear. And often, like what you just said in the use of your elevator speech, man, that's powerful. I don't know if the listeners understand the power. I wish they could see your expression, they would maybe, but the power in what you're saying. You are saying, listen, I need to be clear that in my perspective, what needs to be done is for me to take the first step from the Euro-American perspective to the African-American perspective. I believe it's my responsibility to initiate, to step out, to ask, to invite. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And the Scripture proves it. If you check it out, God took steps to reach beyond, sending Jonah to Nineveh. It's God reaching beyond. We see it in the New Testament. We see Christ at the well, at the woman at the well. We see him in the parable of Luke chapter 10 with the Good Samaritan. So we know that we serve a God who, through Christ, has expressed to us that we should be reaching beyond. But I'm just listening to you. I'm just so glad to be here, because that's the type of verbiage, that's the type of speech, that's the type of conversation that we need to have, because you cannot grab anything that you need to grab without reaching for it. And that's just what you said is profound.
We're going to take a short break. Okay. No, and I'm serious, because this is a great conversation. But when we come back, I want to ask the both of you, because I'm sitting up here watching this, passionate about what we can do together. I want to ask Mark, from the white clergy, from the white parishioners, what they need to probably know best about your experience in dealing with ministers and people in the urban community. And then Dr. Clyde almost reversed the same thing. What we need them to know, because forgiveness is one thing, but we can't forget either. And I think a lot of time the willingness to forgive is there all the time, but then the story, it's like when we have to tell the story of why we have to be forgiving.
That's right.
It seems like that conversation doesn't want to hit the table, and the reality is, man, the oppression is a real thing.
Absolutely.
That the people who were the residue of it need to understand too as well, and that's why people are fractured. We're going to come back. Dr. Clyde Posley, Dr. Mark Echo here on Warp and Woof Radio. We'll be right back. RadioNext.tv, we are live, Warp and Woof Radio. Dr. Mark Echo, Harold H.B. Bell, every Wednesday morning, 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Show brought to you by Comenius Institute. Special guest in studio today, Dr. Clyde Posley. Man, this is good. We're definitely going to have to do this some more. Yep. But tell them about Comenius before we get back in this great conversation, Doc.
Sure. Comenius does 3 bridges throughout Indianapolis. Our first bridge is for Christian young people going into public university at IUPUI, helping them navigate thinking and beliefs and ideas that they haven't heard before. Second bridge is between communities. We essentially do that through our radio show, something like we're doing today about black and white cultures coming together in unity. And the third bridge that we cross is into culture. So we deal with all kinds of cultural interactions, and there's so many different things on my website, the Comenius website. You can go there and find all kinds of things we've written on.
Man, this is a great topic, great conversation, and we were leaving off on the break, and I did post a question because I hear the passion of both of you gentlemen who are trying to break down these barriers, and that's what they are, just barriers, and they're real superficial barriers, as a matter of fact. And Dr. Posley, I was asking, what can we do as black clergy, as a community of black Christians, like you say, to forgive what was done, to be positive about how we move forward, and then Dr. Mark, some of the things that the white parishioners and the white clergy, the misconceptions maybe from your dealings, if we could.
Well, I'll start by telling a story. When my kids were teenagers, I showed them the film Mississippi Burning, which is an awful film in many respects about the difficult situation that we found in Mississippi in 1963 and what happened to civil rights workers there, 1 black man and 2 white men who were killed by white supremacists in Mississippi. When I got all done with this film, and because I'm a movie guy and I've written a book on movies and stuff like this, we're talking about these things with the kids. And Chelsea, my little girl, who's now 31, has a couple kids of her own. She says to me, real sweet, she says, "Daddy," she says, "why are people still so upset about this?" And here's a young girl who, has African American friends, Asian American friends. She's in all this culture, so she's got all these different folks around her. And I said, "Little one," I said, "this is a long history, and this is not ever something to be forgotten. We never want to forget what has happened. We never want to stop talking about it because we never want to see it ever happen again." And so her question, her very sweet, gentle, naive question, really led to the place of being able to say to other people, we should never forget the history. And so when we talk about forgiveness, when we talk about what do white parishioners, what do white pastors, what do white clergy need to do, they need to be able to speak to the history of the sinfulness of what happened in our country through slavery and the implications of what that has meant throughout the years. And so that not only that we have an understanding of this, but that there's a conciliation from our part to the black community so that there can be reconciliation. That's what I would say. There needs to be a conciliation from the white community to the black community so there can be a reconciliation between the communities.
I agree. I agree. And well said, Dr. Eccles. I was speaking. I was lecturing someplace recently, and I was talking about in theory, the very thing that you're talking about, how white pastors need to sit down with white pastors. There need to be forums. There need to be open dialogue in the churches, and not just in academia, but of course in academia, but in the churches. Yes. Inviting one another in to talk to the people from academic perspectives as well as theological perspectives. In one lecture just recently, I was talking about there are pictures out of slave ships, for example, in terms of just the epistemology of this whole getting information out about it. Here's a site of knowing. In these slave ships, it wasn't just the picture that you see of slaves being brought from West Africa, packed into these slave ships. But an important thing to know would speak to the current cultural construct today. Here's what I mean. In these, there's some writings and suggestions that 60% of the slaves that were brought from the West Africa died on these slave passages. These passages took from 4 to 6 months. Now you have to know that these people were shackled to each other. And they and don't mean to be too vulgar, but I'm just trying to create a site of knowing about this information. Yep. So they are defecating where they lay. They are urinating where they lay. And we must be mindful, Dr. Eccles, that one man's daughter was probably shackled across from him on the other, but in view in the slave ship. She is defecating and urinating, and her body is atrophying because they're being thrown slop, hog slop, whatever, they're being fed live fish being thrown shoved down their throat just to keep them alive, to get them to market. Okay, when you have this going on, you have to somehow, the brain, as you know, creates an atmosphere to deal with this, and it numbs itself. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so there is a theory that suggests that some of concepts of devaluing life that people believe that black-on-black crime speaks to, I'm not saying yay or nay, but there is Joy Degree suggests that there is a devaluing of life in among cultures that commit crime against one another. It happens in the white culture as well as in the black, because there are some things in the history that have caused some of the devaluing of life to survive in some regards, and we have to reawaken that. We have to remember that though we have a history of having to, in many instances, be forced to do things to our own race, either numb ourselves from the pain of it, or to just do it what, say, the master said, to survive. We have to reawaken the reality and the value of the life of the culture. Now, I don't want any of the listeners to believe that I'm somehow excusing why there's black-on-black crime or white-on-white crime. But what I'm talking about is that some of the behavior today is rooted in some survival techniques of the past just to cope. Pastors need to explain what I just said to their parishioners. These the people aren't necessarily just savage. When something happens and there seems to be a lack of concern for their fellow man or their fellow culture, we need to find out what's the root cause of such behavior. Yep. How do we? What is the psychology and what's going on in the mind of a culture or a group of people, whether black on black crime or white on white crime or whatever, Asian on Asian crime? What's happening in the culture to make you be antithetical to the needs of your own culture, that you'd be willing to, without seemingly much remorse, kill?
Yes. And it's not just the one thing either.
Yeah, it's not.
There's so many different threads to this. Yeah.
Absolutely. So that was just an example of the type of knowledge that needs to be discussed, so that a different culture can understand some of the behavior and what people are trying to work their way through to get back to the middle. So,
yeah, these things have not been so long ago that we have had to deal with the civil rights marches in the 1960s. We still have folks alive today who were invested and involved in those
I have
marches.
Members.
So, in this, for all those listening to this, don't think that somehow because we're living in 2017 that everything's good now and everything's changed and somehow we're all going to be walking down the road arm in arm.
Absolutely.
We have to remember history. And so history is something that we should never forget. Obviously, Scripture speaks to this constantly.
Yeah, absolutely.
In fact, to your point early in the show, I go back to Leviticus chapter 19, and I remember where Jesus, of course, got his statement about love your neighbor. That's where it comes from.
That's right.
And God says, you are to love the stranger because you know what it was like living in Egypt. Absolutely.
Now, that is rooted in the first 5 books of the Bible we hold so sacred. Absolutely. That's a powerful point.
It's a very important issue that we never forget history, and one that you and I share obvious passion for in this respect. The issue of how do you navigate that from now on, now that's an ongoing discussion. But we have to at least lay the groundwork and set the foundation stone and say we need to begin here. We don't need to dwell here. We don't need to talk about this but we need to start here.
Right.
And now we need to go from here, and now we need to go ahead together.
That's right. And at the core of that, I think one of the ways we begin is to look at the needs of people. A person's a group, a hegemonic policy is an indicator of hegemonic perception and philosophy.
Explain hegemonic for everybody.
A group,
Yeah.
a group dynamic, a superior group, a larger group, not necessarily superior, but a group of people. That group, whether it be the government, whether it be a culture, whether it be a church board, a church congregation, a radio at 317 collaboration group, their policies set forth their perception and their philosophies.
Yes.
To bring unity, the government and other groups have to set forth policies that speak to the needs of the stranger, the downtrodden, the outcast. In Jesus' first sermon, the Beatitudes, he began to speak about the poor in spirit, the poor financially, the oppressed Jewish state or Hebrew state in Palestine. He talked about this. He addressed, and so let me bring this to 2017. We cannot say we love each other as a country, calling ourselves a Christian nation, and we ourselves a Christian nation.
And you want to sweep it under the rug and you want to act like it didn't exist.
Right.
That's, I think,
that's the
when
problem,
we've got a problem is because it did happen. It's over. We know we need to move forward. But aren't you even conscious of why maybe this group of people act like they act in certain situations? Why anger might be a little bit quicker to come about in the sense of, I tell people all the time, my sisters, as an African-American man, my African-American sisters are the toughest species God ever put on this. No, I am serious as I know how to be. They are the strongest species God put on this earth, because if black men think that we were oppressed, what do you think that, quote unquote, the second class human known as woman that's been identified in this thing? I ain't got nothing to do with it. It's just the way it's been. And being an African American sister, it's a tough gig. But I watched Grace, and I watched this little grandmother of mine, man, do some things. At the time she did them, going up into Carmel and Zionsville. She had a little brick and brack store. And I mean, we were up in Zionsville and Carmel when I was 5 years old, when, we wasn't that far from the sign saying colored only, white only. We just weren't that far away from it. And I watched her deal with such grace with a population of people that never made me feel like they thought she was a little black lady. And I said, I can do that. And that's my motto.
Yeah.
And it's pretty much worked for me. And that's not everybody's role or everybody's game, but it was mine. And I think that if we can just learn to just open up our hearts and love a little more, we can get this thing right.
I do believe.
I'm going to go out trying. But we've got our next guest in studio, Dr. Mark, and we're going to continue this great conversation about a healing nation.
Yes,
How
we
are we
will.
going to help this thing heal? And when we go to the break, think about it. How would you make it a better place to live? You are listening to the Warp and Woof radio show on the Cool Groove site at RadioNext.TV. RadioNext.TV. We are live on Warp and Woof Radio here at RadioNext.TV at the brand new studio at Collaborate 317. And I have to say this each and every time we get on the air. If you get an opportunity, please come out and visit us at 4202 North EMS Boulevard, Greenfield, Indiana. That's right, Greenfield, Indiana. Jumbo's Gun Country, 46140. And come out and check out this great, great facility. Dr. Mark, take your show back, man.
You are so funny. My twin, my brother. Oh, my. He's gone country. Boy, I'll tell you what. The first time that you start playing country music, man, then I'm going to know you went country.
Country syrup.
For those of you who don't know, HB has his show on Saturday morning. It's called Jumbo Love from 8 to 12. And as he likes to say, he pours syrup from 8 to 9 for all of the ladies that like to listen to the old smooth jazz. You don't want to miss that show. It's really great and has an awful lot of great guests on every single week. That's something that is happening here on Saturdays. And HB mentioned that we have folks who are coming in to visit, and we really do encourage that. Actually, I was just taking a couple of folks here around on tours this morning. Got another one of our contributors coming in at 1 o'clock this afternoon just to show him this new place. We're just tremendously excited to be with lots of different people who have the same mindset in terms of collaboration and interest in working together at Collaborate 317. So do come out, check us out on Facebook, connect with me via email. Twitter, Instagram. Shoot me a text. My number is 630-303-4891. My stuff is all over the place. You can't miss me. So find it and come connect with us. But during this particular day, we have been emphasizing this idea that we are a divided nation. We have talked about the ethnic issues in our nation. We've done this on a number of other shows. In our first hour, we had Dr. Clyde Posley here, a tremendous pastor of Antioch Baptist, and we were having a tremendous conversation about the needs that we have together and working together. In fact, just as he was leaving, he said, let's get together this coming week. So we're going to meet and talk about what we might actually do together in the city and around Indianapolis. But in our second hour, we have a great privilege, and that is Mike Rowell is here, and he is going to talk with us about Q Commons. Now, I've had some conversations this week, Mike, with some folks about Q Commons, and they kind of wrinkle their brow and they go, Q Commons, what's that? I've never heard of that before, so of course I have to be the evangelist and tell them about Q Commons.
I'm grateful for every chance you take to do that.
But I'll tell you, man, this is such a powerful organization, and it's a national organization, certainly an international one, with cities around the world that actually engage in this. So let's start with you telling us just a little bit about yourself, your family, and just what you do in Indianapolis. But then beyond that, take us into Q Commons and give us the background.
Okay. I'm grateful to be here, Mark. Thank you. My name is Mike Rowell, and I am blessed to be the wife of Christy. And
the wife?
Or the husband. That's right. I got a wife. I'm the husband. I am the husband of Christy, and I have 4 great kids. 16 to 11, so kind of a busy time in the family right now. Mm-hmm. So I moved to Indy 11 years ago to pastor a church, and I was at that particular position for 5 years. But in those 5 years, God birthed in me a love for the city of Indianapolis, and God flipped a switch in me, a switch from seeing the problems of the city as someone else's problem, as seeing it as someone else's fault, and thus it was their responsibility to deal with it. And God flipped that switch to where I started to want to identify with the city and be part of the solution. I wanted to be part of the flourishing of the city, to use some scriptural language. So then my time at that particular pastorate came to an end. I have a pastor's heart, and I believe that God ultimately wants me to plant another faith community in the northeast corner of Indianapolis, the Lawrence area there. So looking forward to that. But in the meantime, God wouldn't let me leave Indianapolis. Even after my time at that pastorate came to an end, he wouldn't let me leave. And I realized that God sort of wanted me to plant my flag here and say, until I'm going to raise my kids well, I'm going to love my wife, and I'm going to observe what God's doing here and be part of it and connect people and contribute to that in that way. And so around the same time that God was stirring those directions in my heart, I came across a national organization called Q. Q was started by a man by the name of Gabe Lyons, who many in Christian leadership circles would remember as being one of the founders and sort of one of the figureheads of the Catalyst Conference. He was with John Maxwell's leadership group for a long time. And Gabe started this organization to help Christians discern how to influence culture. And Gabe was greatly influenced by the work and writings of Chuck Colson. Chuck Colson, many would identify as someone who sort of reintroduced the idea of Christians and they're having a responsibility to contribute to the flourishing of culture, and that the Christian faith actually speaks to a responsibility for that. And so Gabe started Q, and about 10, 11 years ago, started that organization. Started with a national conference that brought together thinkers from across many different disciplines, some who shared the Christian faith, some who didn't necessarily, but whose perspectives needed to be part of the conversation. And about 4 years ago, the Q organization decided to add an event that would be a combination of satellite speakers broadcast to multiple locations, along with live local speakers who would address these issues at the local level and be practitioners who were on the ground, as it were. And so that event is called Q Commons. It has grown to where on October 26th, tomorrow, we will have this event in over 150 locations around the world. Most of them in the United States, but in many, probably we're getting up to 15, 20 in international locations. And so there will be a like I said, a combination of broadcast speakers who will speak to topics from a more national perspective, and then they'll be combined with live local talks from in the case of Indianapolis, from our perspective, addressing the unifying topic of healing our divided nation. And so just in my preparation and in my telling people about it and bringing these people together, I am really excited for what I believe is going to happen. The content is always first class, on the national level certainly, and I'm excited about the live local speakers who are doing some great things, and I'm grateful they're going to get to share their stories with people who perhaps have not heard of them or are looking for ways to collaborate and contribute. But always, one of the biggest takeaways is the people that you meet, because the Q is a little hard to describe. It has a little, up to this point, it has a little bit of a dog whistle quality to it, where the way you talk about it, some people go, okay, and some people go, I want to be part of that.
Yeah.
And so the people that come are either curious or they're all in on wanting to contribute to the healing of our nation, and starting with the city of Indianapolis. And so I always take away from these events the wonderful people who are doing tremendous things, or who have a passion to do something. And you get to meet them, you get to hear their stories, you get to talk through how you can help. And for me, in addition to the content, that's always the best part is, I started being the Indianapolis host because I wanted to go to it. I did. I didn't. I just, nobody else was doing it, and I wanted to meet these people. And I made an erroneous assumption early on in my time in Indianapolis that if I knew awesome person A and awesome person B, I assumed that they knew each other because they were both awesome. And it turns out that's not the case.
Right.
Indy's a big enough city that people can be doing amazing things, and just, we're locked in on our daily lives and what God's called us to do and stuff, and not know that each other exists. And so for me, that's one of the best parts of the event.
Well, let me just clarify for everybody listening today that Mike is an awesome person and that he needs to be known by everybody else. This is really huge. And your comment about the dog whistle, oh my word, I thought I was going to lose the lung over here laughing. That was just hilarious. But it's exactly true. As I was telling you off air, I feel like I'm an evangelist for Q because I meet people and they tell me, I've never heard of that before. Yeah. And so I go into my long speech, about what a great organization this is and all the great things they do. And then there are folks who automatically know and they say, yeah, I'm going to. Just so you know, by the way, since we're dealing with the divided nation topic, and maybe you can kind of roll out some of what that actually is going to be. This last week on the radio show, we had George Middleton with us, who just wrote a book entitled Black, which is how the African-American experience brings a certain mindset to everything that they deal with. Yeah. And after the show, I said, George, have you ever heard of Q? And he said, no. And I said, well, you want to go with me? And he said, yeah. So, awesome. George is coming with me on tomorrow night, and we're looking forward to it.
Yeah, and it's interesting that we talked about the sort of dog whistle metaphor.
Yeah.
Because you know Pastor G as a friend of both of us.
Sure.
I was on his Forward radio show Sunday evening.
Nice.
And what seems to sort of be bubbling to the surface in talks around this subject in Indianapolis is the race conversation and what reconciliation and what understanding and what forward progress is going to look like. And Pastor G was just like super blunt for a few seconds there and just sort of asked me a question asked me to speak on behalf of white America for a second, or at least white evangelicals, and he was honest in saying that that certain events that are happening in our culture are perceived by the African American community a certain way, and his basic question was, why aren't you guys seeing it this way? And he actually brought up the metaphor of the dog whistle, and I said that's a really apt metaphor because there are some of us who are seeing. I mean, there's different groups, and this is true across the board. Different groups of people are looking at the exact same set of events, set of circumstances, and they are interpreting it and interpreting what or thinking through what forward progress looks like completely different ways.
Exactly.
And so we want to, in terms of this particular conversation, we want to bring together people who are looking for healing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who want to contribute to healing in that regard.
And we want to make sure that we get a full-throated response to all of that. So we need to take a break and do some music here. But when we come back, Mike and I are going to continue this conversation specifically around the issue of ethnicity and the concerns that we have in the United States of America. You're listening to Warp and Woof Radio on RadioNext.tv at the Cool Groove site. And we are back, Warp and Woof Radio at RadioNext.tv at the Cool Groove site. And today we are discussing the issue of the divide in us, in our nation, that has to do with racial issues and difficulties. And in the first hour, we had Dr. Posley from Antioch Baptist here with us and discussing some of the perspectives from his vantage point at his church. All of this is on the podcast, of course. If you missed that first hour, you can pick it up later in the day when our streams come out. But right now, we have Mike Rowell in the studio with us, and Mike is here from Q Commons. And in the first segment here of our second hour, we were talking about what Q is and what it stands for and all those kinds of things. Mike, why don't you just give us kind of a repeat, tell us about what's going to happen tomorrow night so that people are aware of what's going on tomorrow night, and then we'll get back into the issue of racial issues.
Good deal. Tomorrow night is Q Commons Indianapolis. We will be certainly for any listeners from outside Indianapolis, you can go to qcommons.com and look up a list of locations where it's going down. It'll be 150 different sites where this is happening. But for us in Indianapolis, the venue will be the Skyline Club at the Bank One building downtown. Start time is 7 o'clock. Doors open at 6:30. Tickets can be purchased at qcommons.com/Indianapolis. And so the event will be a combination of broadcast speakers. Talks will be 9 minutes or 18 minutes in length. They have a format very similar to TED Talks for listeners who might be familiar with that. So there will be 3 national scope speakers who will be broadcast, and then 3 local speakers who will be live. And in addition, we will take a bit of time to both introduce and recognize some groups who are doing great work here in the city. Q Commons Indianapolis is partnering with Chosen Ministries this year. They've been a big help to us just in terms of providing an administrative back end for a lot of the details of putting on an event like this. They're doing amazing work with helping single-parent families build sustainable careers. And I'm excited to be able to introduce them to our audience and have people see how they can help collaborate with them and partner with them. Some Stone's Table, Sagamore Leadership Initiative, and Unite Indy are some of the organizations that are partnering with us for this event, and we'll be introducing their leaders and their missions to the audience. In addition, K-Love and Air One will be handing out awards to organizations who exemplify the work of the kingdom in Indianapolis. So that'll be part of the event as well.
That's wonderful. These are great things. There are so many good things that are happening around Indianapolis, and quite frankly, what ends up happening is that we don't know about each other.
Exactly.
So it sounds like I have a whole set of interviews already set up just from all the names you just gave us.
Good deal. I'm excited about it. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
These are folks that need to be heard. We were talking off air about Pastor G, and Pastor Girton has been on our program here. He has his radio show on 1310. But we're grateful to kind of cross paths with all kinds of different folks around Indianapolis. Doesn't matter. As long as everybody's doing good, as Christians, that really makes a huge difference for us. Well, let's get into this issue of the racial divide and the need to heal issues in our nation. From your vantage point, Mike, how are you and Q coming at this? What is your approach going to be like, and what kind of results do you expect to see out of this?
Well, I'll speak to the best that I can from the perspective of Q as a national organization. The first step we have to take, and I believe that Q has been attempting to take, is to introduce the perspectives of people who are not like us. We have to hear the stories of people whose life experience doesn't match ours, because so much of our values and so much of what we see as important, so much of what we see as being worth pursuing and worth working through roadblocks for, comes from what we understand to be important, and that's from our life experience. And one of the things that one of the national talks will be on technology addiction. And one of the things that this cultural moment has produced because of technology and because of just sort of facilitating sort of the worst instincts in us, perhaps, one of the things that has happened is that we've just fallen into these silos in terms of life experience. And all of the voices, for the majority of people, all of the voices that speak into our lives, that inform our values, that inform our decisions, that inform our sense of what needs to be talked about, what something needs to be done about, all of that is just coming from people who share our life experience. And so someone says this is important, and it's so totally foreign to us that it might as well be bouncing off an actual wall, because it just doesn't resonate with us at all. So Q has done a good job over the past 10 years of bringing people to the table, bringing speakers to the consciousness of their audience and of the Christian community whose perspectives are different from others, whose life experiences are different from others. And so, we're going to do that in this Q Commons Indianapolis event as well. And so, we really, just in talking about it, I really think that's where it has to start. Because from that, we talk about dialogue as being needed, but we can't really. Part of the reason that we're shouting at each other instead of talking to each other is that we don't understand each other's life experiences. We're not aware of their perspective on the same set of events. And so I think that's where it has to start. Q is doing just a slight preview. They're going to announce a campaign at the event tomorrow called Up to Us, and it is a series of actions that an individual can take to address the divided nature of our nation. And it involves things like meeting for coffee with someone whose life experience is different than yours. Agreeing to be vocal about the need for this issue to be addressed. It's very easy to look at it from a 30,000-foot perspective or from the perspective of the media or the national news and just think it's sort of already routed toward like whatever destruction looks like, But to be a Christian is to believe that there is something that we can do. To be a Christian is to believe that to follow the ways of Jesus is to believe that the individual has a choice whose consequences will resonate and reverberate within groups, within neighborhoods, and make a difference for the world.
Yeah. This reminds me of, just to give a specific example of this, in the NFL right now, for instance, the whole Colin Kaepernick thing that happened last year, taking a knee during the anthem. We actually did something on this in one of our episodes here a few months back. Has, of course, morphed into much more than that now in many respects, in different directions. Not my interest in saying that out loud is not to make that point, but here's the point I want to make. What isn't being said is the good stuff that's going on. So the other night I went to hear a band at a local bar, and it was a great band. Some folks from my church were there doing their thing, and I wanted to go and support them. It was really good music. So they got screens all over the place, and one of the screens is ESPN. And on the screen here is the owner of the New England Patriots, who has taken former coaches and NFL players to Israel so that they might hear the gospel in Israel and be baptized in the Jordan River. This is on ESPN, folks.
Wow.
ESPN. Okay, so I don't want to talk about Colin Kaepernick taking with me. I want to talk about the owner of the New England Patriots. By the way, I have no love lost for the Patriots. I want to talk about what he's doing that's good.
Yes.
One of the things that we've lost in all of this back and forth that we do with each other is we're not talking about what each other is doing good in the community.
That's right.
How important is that?
Exactly. And to that end, one of our speakers will be Ashley Griffiths, who recently left a position. She was a legislative aide in the Indiana State House, and sort of a rising figure within the Democratic Party. Left that position to be the head of Eastern Star Church's Rock Initiative, which seeks to improve the lives of the people in the 46218 area code. And she is seeing, even in this transition, it's only been like 3 months, or even early on, just seeing some wonderful things happening there in terms of neighborhoods being brought together. She's helping neighborhoods start neighborhood organizations, like recognize that we can come together as a group and affect change on our street, and helping with things like that, and just seeing even at the early stage that she's at, seeing some wonderful things happen in an area of the city that could really use some wonderful things to happen.
That really strikes me as you mention it about the political specter. Maybe I could use that word. I was going to say sphere, but I don't know anymore. I feel like it's a specter. The issues that surround us politically, it sure seems like it doesn't really matter who's has the control of the White House, the Senate. What matters is who has the power, and who's going to hold sway, and who's not going to let who talk, and all those kinds of things. It surely seems that not only is the political structure in the nation, and maybe even in our own communities, broken, but then the question becomes, okay, so where are you going to put your effort?
Yeah.
What are you going to spend time doing?
Sure.
Now, that's not to suggest, by the way, that people shouldn't be in politics who are Christians, because that's a really important issue.
Yes.
But nonetheless, for somebody to step out of that limelight and go back into the community and say, you know what, I can do something on the ground level, literally on the street level, as you suggest.
Exactly.
That's an amazing thing.
It really is. And I am looking forward to introducing her to our audience tomorrow. And just in my short time of knowing her, she feels like it was a divine calling, you know, and so for, you know, the Christian faith needs to be presented as something to aspire to. You know, the things we should be known for doing things that contribute to the good of our city and our nation, and have it be known that is welling up from our Christian faith.
Yes.
And that would be one of the overarching themes that Q would want to present, and certainly that I'm passionate about on our local level here, is that we sort of, you know, many Christians are uncomfortable with the language of marketing, but we kind of need to rebrand Christianity. It's been portrayed as being the root cause of a lot of divisiveness, of a lot of the forming of these silos where we don't hear, or we're not aware of the perspectives of people whose experiences and even theological beliefs are different from us, that needs to change. I don't think that honors Jesus. I don't think that's what Jesus was about.
Right. It reminds me to say that, you know, we all have perceptions of what other people do, or even about ourselves. We have perceptions, whether they be right or wrong, good or bad necessarily. But the point is that each one of us brings those perceptions to the table, and then they become this blanket over which, you know, is laid. We think about everybody else from this perspective and point of view. I mean, I have friends in the community that are progressive and liberal, very different from my perspectives as a conservative preservative, concerned for the great ideas and ideals of culture. But you know what? When you start talking with folks, you find out that you agree on a whole bunch more than you disagree on.
Exactly.
And normally what we disagree on is the approach. So maybe that's something we could talk about, is this issue of the approach. When we talk about doing good, which, by the way, for those of you regular listeners, you always hear me say this, the whole point of this program is Titus 3, do good, do good, do good. Christians that are doing good. So people get the perception that Christians are divisive or have created the silos. Certainly is not true. There are a lot of good folks doing really good work around the community, around the world. But nonetheless, we have to deal with those kinds of things. So let's deal with, how do we present ourselves to other people, and maybe the communication problems that we might have. And let's talk about that a little bit, about how do we go about maybe recapturing the way, or rebranding, as you've suggested, how we should look at each other and talk about ourselves.
Well, that's a big question.
Sorry.
Yeah, I forgot my 3-point plan at home.
Oh, no.
So where does it start?
Let's start there.
Yeah, I think it has to start with a sort of soul-searching process.
There you go.
Okay, it has to start with us recognizing, and I'll speak for myself. Okay,
Yep.
It started with me recognizing that things were not as they should be, and that it was within my capacity, it was worth the effort on my part to change that.
Yes.
Okay, so I come from a really conservative background. I come from a life experience that for a long time was almost completely devoid of African American people, okay, much less the African American community.
Right.
I moved to Indianapolis from a city that is listed in the U.S. Census as being 99.3% Caucasian. So when I came to Indianapolis and moved to my street I moved there in 05, like the end of 05, beginning of 06, right at just when the housing bubble was at its biggest. Okay, so we were all moving. We were all moving into these houses we couldn't afford. Okay, they were just throwing them up like crazy, and we were moving in. And in my neighborhood, my neighbors were, there was an African American family on this side, there was an African American family on this side, there was a mixed race family on this side, an interracial marriage and kids on this side, white family on across the street a little bit further down, and that was the first time that I had ever been in that sort of constant proximity to people with those experiences, to those kinds of people. And I was naive enough to want them. I was a pastor. I mean, I moved to Indy to be a pastor. I was naive enough to think that I wanted them to be introduced to Jesus and come to my church. And so I'm within my religious expression. There was someone who was sort of looked up to, African-American pastor, and I asked him what I needed to do to reach out to these folks. And he told me with complete seriousness and with complete, I'm sure he meant well by it, he told me I needed to lead a young African-American a man to Jesus, get him through theological training, and help him start a church there for black people. And even as naive as I was at that point, I just thought, I don't think that's it. I don't think that's certainly not the answer that I feel I'm supposed to pursue. So for me, it started with that. It started with the sense that this needed to change, and that there was something that I could do that was worth my pursuing. So for me, then it then went to going, sort of inserting myself into the lives of these families, being a blessing to them.
Yeah.
I could, we had a single mother and two teenage boys that lived across the street. One of the boys came over, asked to use the restroom because they'd locked themselves out of the house and the mom wasn't coming home from work for a few hours. My wife, Christy, let him come in and use the restroom, but then asked him if he'd had anything to eat, and he was starving.
Oh.
So she made him a meal.
Yeah.
She made him a sandwich and chips. I mean, it wasn't it wasn't prime rib, but she made him a sandwich and chips and gave him the Gatorade and stuff.
Yeah.
He came back the next day with a bouquet of flowers.
Oh, my word.
And started a relationship to where those two, they're young men now. They call me Dad.
Oh, my.
They call my wife Mom. They ask how we're doing. One's in the Navy in the Air Force, and one's in Chicago pursuing a music career.
Nice.
And they always, even if their journey does not correspond to what I wish it would be or what I could hope it would be, I know that they know what Jesus is like because of the time that we spent together. And once you get a taste of that, nothing else is better. Nothing you can't go back.
Yeah.
I guess is the better way to put it.
Yeah.
So I met Pastor G because both of us had kids who were taking free coding classes, and we just had this radar. Like there was 25 of us parents sitting in a room waiting for our kids to get done.
Yeah.
And we couldn't go anywhere, so we're just sitting there. Everybody's on their phones, and I look across at him and I'm like, that dude looks like a pastor. And I introduced myself, and we've been friends ever since.
Nice.
He started the Urban Servant Leadership Conference. I've been to every one. The first one, I was the only white dude there.
Yeah.
And so you just start showing up.
That's right. And there, to be honest with you, folks, I say this all the time. Mike, honestly, I sound like a broken record, what I'm about to say.
Sure.
You do not have to go to seminary to do this.
Oh, exactly.
You do not. This is not rocket science. All you have to do is get out of your house, cross the street, and meet somebody that's not like you.
Yes.
honestly, I mean, talk about the first step in
Right.
communication is just go, like you did with Pastor G, go shake hands and say, hey, you look like a pastor. That's just a great line. Oh, I wonder, how does he remember it the same way?
Oh, yeah.
Did he look at you and say, he looks like a pastor?
He probably did. Yeah.
That's great. You know, this is really the powerful issue, I think, and one of the things that really sidelines us in all of our discussions about everything, and that is the issue of listening.
Mm-hmm.
Just to be able to hear somebody else. And frankly, that's the bigger problem I think that we face, is that we're unwilling to hear. There's this threefold process in the process of hearing and listening and then doing something about it. In Hebrew, the word is shema, and it means to hear. That is, you get it in your mind. Listen means that you are thinking about it, pondering it. But then the obedience part, to do something with it, is the action step involved in all of that. And that really seems to me like what we all ought to be doing.
Yes. The phrase comes to mind that Jesus uttered, he that hath ears to hear.
Yeah, there you go. That's right.
We need ears to hear. We don't, and Jesus made it clear, when you have ears to hear, you'll hear things that you won't hear otherwise.
Right.
You know, and that's the case for many people. They
Yes.
they hear, they hear, listen, and they say, I am listening. You know, I stopped for 30 seconds and, you know, heard your little sound bite, and it doesn't move me. It doesn't move the needle. And
Right.
it might be worth for many of us exploring what Jesus meant when he said, he that hath ears to hear, and
Right.
and, you know, really dealing with whether we actually have, whether that's actually in place for us.
It strikes me to say this, that let's just be honest with everybody. You know, this seems like a trite statement, but everybody is biased and everybody is prejudiced, and we are prejudiced and biased because we're only listening to ourselves. We're only listening to our perspective or point of view. We're only listening to the same media group. We're only listening to reading the same newspapers or magazines, or reading the same stuff on the same websites every single day, instead of expanding our horizons in different directions and hearing other folks. One of the situations that confronts me all the time is when I hear NPR, which I'm a regular listener to NPR, which I disagree with a lot of things that I hear on NPR from my perspective. But when my friends who are conservative say, why do you listen to NPR? I tell them, you have to listen to what people are saying so that you understand, at least begin the understanding part of thinking about what somebody else is considering, even if you disagree.
That's
but
right.
you've started the process of listening.
Yes, exactly. And I just, at this point, if I may throw in,
Please.
you know, it is, there will be other topics addressed at our
Sure. Go ahead and
at
tell
our
them
event.
about those. Yeah, please.
You know, David Brooks, who is a cultural commentator for the New York Times, will be addressing the subject of virtue and building virtue in this celebrity-obsessed culture that we live in. Kara Powers will be addressing technology addiction. A lot of her work right now is with teenagers and how, and more broadly with everyone in our culture, but specifically how our very life experiences and our very physiology is being shaped by addiction, by technology, and forming addictive behaviors there. And so, you know, and the spoken word artist Propaganda will be addressing the subject of our complicated moment, which will deal with race, but sort of look at it from a broader perspective. And so it is always interesting to me. This is the fifth one that I've hosted here in Indianapolis. It's really hard to settle on speakers.
Yeah.
You know, it's really hard to I mean, the national organization chooses the theme, and we have latitude within that to choose local speakers. And then there's people who are available and people who aren't. And so all of that to say, you know, this particular issue is sort of organically coming to the surface as one that needs to be addressed, and that there's sort of a thirst for being addressed. And so it may well be that the next time we come together that something else is coming to the surface. And so I don't want people for whom this doesn't resonate necessarily to not come. Just, I don't want it to sound like this is the only thing we're going to talk about. Yeah. I cannot deny that the intersection of the people I'm meeting and talking to, the speakers who have agreed to come and who worked out to come, combined with the subject matter that's being addressed by the national organization, what we're talking about here is at the intersection of those things, and so it will be. That's part of the reason that it's taking the space at the front of our consciousness now.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes me want to say to everybody listening again that if you've been online here the last week or so, we've been promoting our latest 1-minute video, which is how Christians interpret the world around them based on God's Word. And the emphasis, of course, is exactly the emphasis that Q is producing here. And that is, the speakers might not be using chapter and verse from Scripture, but they're going to be talking about universal transcendent truths. Yes. And these truths are going to make a difference in very specific arenas, whether it be in race or technology, or in a broader understanding of how we view virtue, for instance, and how those things intersect with our lives. So it's really powerful to have lots of different things going on. Let's take this the next step, though. After Q is over, so let's say on Friday, people maybe they attended, maybe they saw it live stream, maybe they just heard about it and they said, wow, this really is intriguing. Where do they go from here? What's the next step for folks after Q?
Well, so the Q National Organization is a great, connecting with them is a great way to keep this at the forefront, just in terms of they're continually producing content that addresses these subjects, and content that will enlighten and guide in some of these conversations. We will be doing some events just to bring people back together. It is certainly our hope that that relationships will start at this event, and that that the folks who meet each other will be able to build those relationships from there and collaborate from there and stuff. And we certainly desire to have more of a formal presence as a community to help connect people who have these passions, resources with passion, and those kinds of things. It is not something that's been real formalized up to this point in Indianapolis, but something we're certainly looking to build out, and certainly would look to partner with your organization and with others in making that happen.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Mike, thanks ever so much for spending some time with us here today.
Absolutely. It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for the promotion of Q Commons. Again, Q tomorrow night, Skyline Club, downtown Indianapolis, 7 to 9. If you're not available for that, do either catch the live stream and or connect after the fact. This is a great organization, one that deserves our attention, one that's getting after the issue of how do we think Christianly about the culture in which we live. Of course, that's one of the bridges that Comenius is after, is helping Christians understand the culture better and understand how to interact with it. Next week, we are going to start a whole month, a series during the month of November on the issue of gratitude. So all of the folks that we're inviting in, we're asking them to speak on the issue of gratitude. What has made them thankful? Obviously, upcoming Thanksgiving holiday, but nonetheless something that we want to pursue, and every single week we'll be dealing with that. We have been grateful to be in the new facility here at Collaborate 317. Make sure to come and see us out here. Connect with me somehow. ComeniusInstitute.com, warpandwoof.org. See me all over social media. We're all over the place. Connect with HB, Harold Bell here at the radio station as well. We'll be happy to meet with you, give you a tour, talk with you about this great event and this great place out here in Greenfield. You've been listening to Warp and Woof Radio. We come to you every Wednesday morning from 10 until noon at the RadioNext.TV Cool Groove site. And until next week, we'll see you then.